All right. So last time we were talking about stuff, we were talking about potential war winners that Japan had. So that's what we were talking about last time. And we also had gotten into talking about the results of World War One, how Japan took over several German islands, how they had kind of extended their control into China, taking over both Manchuria, and then starting their task of trying to take over the rest of China in 1937. So Manchuria falls in 1931, and then the rest of China, they then began their invasion of in 1937. We talked about last time how China was in the midst right now of a civil war between three major groups: the Manchus in the north, and the nationalist and communist governments in the main part of China. All right. So up to November 1941, we can kind of see right here, this kind of dotted line here, striped line. You can kind of see the extent of Japanese control. So this is kind of the areas that Japan controls. Now, they didn't control the Philippines this time period. That was still owned by us. And there's some islands out here in the Marshall Islands that also was owned by the United States as well. So it's not like they have direct control like all this area over here. That kind of shows where they could strike to and such. More places in circles right here. So places in circles. That's the areas that they had troops in, and then they had kind of ships out throughout this area and such. So U.S. and Japanese relations, they were pretty much in decline, and they've been in decline for a while. Remember kind of the 3-5-5 ratio, which limited the Japanese Navy to 60% of that of the United States in 1922. The relationship between America and Japan had kind of been going south for a while, mainly because we had, of course, stuff out here in this area, some islands and so forth that we controlled and that were right next to Japan that put us in kind of direct conflict with Japan. We also had boats out here and so forth. And one of those boats, a gunboat, it was hanging out by Panay in China. It ends up getting destroyed. It was a Japanese fault. We were pretty ticked off at them for that. And that was in 1937. And we end up canceling a trade agreement with the Japanese over the destruction of our boat in China. And the trade agreement we had with Japan basically allowed Japan to buy scrap iron from us. And then they would take that scrap iron, and then Japan would then interject carbon into the iron to then make that into steel. So steel is just iron and with carbon added into it. It's mostly iron, like 99%, but like or 99.9% iron and like 0.1% carbon, and that makes steel. Okay, so that's what steel. Make a new bullet, write down Pearl Harbor. Bullet Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor was a major fleet base of the United States Navy in the Pacific. It was kind of the major one. Los Angeles being their place where we also had boats at as well. But the major place of our Pacific fleet was Pearl Harbor, which is located in Hawaii. And so that's where Pearl Harbor is located at. And a lot of our ships were kind of hanging out there. The Japanese decided that they would want to strike at Pearl Harbor. And the idea was that they hit Pearl Harbor and was able to do enough damage to our Navy that then we wouldn't want to then go to war with Japan, because they'd be like, we don't have a Navy to fight against Japan. I guess we won't fight them then. That was kind of the Japanese thought. If they could do a whole bunch of damage to us, then maybe we wouldn't fight them. Or with enough damage done to our Navy, it would allow Japan to do whatever they would like to do for a while before we could then attack back and so forth. So they were kind of have free roam of the Pacific. And it turns out that's not what ended up happening. So we're going to write down the date in which this happens on, which is December 7th, 1941. So we're going to make a 1. We're going to down December 7th, 1941. So a Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, we kind of knew Japan wanted to attack us at Pearl Harbor. We had broken the Japanese code before this, so we already knew what the Japanese were kind of saying to each other and so forth. So we're already pretty aware at this point in time of what Japan kind of was plotting and so forth. We saw Japan might attack Pearl Harbor actually at the end of November. We were actually thought they might attack us at Pearl Harbor. So we had people on high alert at the end of November, but then nothing ever happened. And it was like, oh, well, I guess maybe it was nothing. Maybe we just maybe Japan decided, against it. So we did have people actually in high alert at Pearl Harbor at the end of November, just because we thought they might attack us at the end of November. But it turns out, no, it was actually a week later on December 7th is actually when the Japanese chose to attack us at Pearl Harbor. And there was a whole bunch of kind of errors and so forth that led to Pearl Harbor being pretty undefended and the Japanese kind of getting in and doing quite a lot of damage. And I'll kind of show you some pictures and so forth. So I'll kind of show you some pictures of ships and so forth that were kind of damaged. The Japanese carriers that they were using. So we took quite a bit of damage at Pearl Harbor. Quite a lot of boats and so forth were destroyed. And with a lot of our boats destroyed, even though boats were destroyed, there was certain things at Pearl Harbor that weren't destroyed. You had various repair facilities that weren't damaged. And a lot of the repair facilities, if we just tugged the boats over a couple hundred, yards and then could fix them up. So a lot of repair facilities we could kind of fix up. But there was quite a bit of damage that was done at Pearl Harbor to our boats and such, as you can kind of see in the pictures I've been showing you. Now, even though we did have a lot of boats and battleships and such that were destroyed, it turns out that in World War II, battleships aren't very useful. It turns out that carriers, like the USS Enterprise here, turns out they're way more useful. And the reason why carriers are more useful is because you can put planes on them. The planes can take off. The planes can fly for hundreds of miles, way further than what you can fire a cannon. And they can then attack another boat and destroy it and then fly back. So the planes turned out to be just way more useful for finding a boat, destroying boat, and then coming back. So it was a lot more useful to have carriers than having other ships with cannons that just couldn't shoot as far. And then, of course, other boats then had to have anti-aircraft guns on them and so forth to deal with the planes and such. So it was a lot more effective just having carriers moving around and attacking targets from a long distance than trying to move closer and firing at boats with cannons. So this proved to be a bit more effective. And the Enterprise is going to be kind of one of our lead boats. So the Enterprise, Yorktown, Hornet were some of the main boats that are going to be used by the United States after Pearl Harbor. And they were all off, as I said, the carriers, they were all off. They weren't actually at Pearl Harbor at that day. So they were all off. So after Pearl Harbor, we're going to end up using a lot of the carriers, which is going to be useful because none of those guys were at Pearl Harbor on the day on December 7th. So they're all, just fine. All right, we're going to stop there with today's notes.